time to kill, or TTK for short. As it suggests, this is how long it takes for a weapon to secure a kill, factoring in the number of shots a weapon takes to kill, aka the damage, and its fire rate. This is arguably the most important stat on a weapon as it indicates the weapon's lethality. In fact, some of the best weapons in the game are known for having extremely fast time to kills, so that should mean that a good weapon must always have a super fast time to kill, right? Not necessarily. In the same way not every fast killing gun is meta, not every good gun kills insanely fast. That is because while time to kill is a very important stat, there is a lot more that goes into a weapon than solely its time to kill. There are plenty of other aspects to consider, such as accuracy, mobility, mag size, and several others, all of which if balanced correctly can partially mitigate a slower time to kill. And no other weapon pushes this idea quite as well as Season 2's newest kid on the block, the Lachmann 5.56. For the majority of this video, I shall be comparing the Lachmann to the XM4 since the Lachmann is supposed to be its successor. Starting off with the lethality, the Lachmann has a 4-tap time to kill of 249 milliseconds, nearly 10 milliseconds slower than the XM4. Many players will look at this stat and immediately write the weapon off as being completely useless. Oh, but it kills slower than the other better weapons, it's trash. But as previously mentioned, the Lachmann brings a lot more to the table than solely its time to kill. For starters, the Lachmann has a very strong headshot multiplier, allowing it to 3-tap in the initial range by landing just one headshot, just like the XM4 and Type 19. This grants an extremely fast time to kill of 166 milliseconds, partially compensating for the slower body shot time to kill. It is worth pointing out that you can also achieve this potential by landing 2 chest shots. This is a pretty rare occurrence given the difficulty of landing chest shots in general, but it does mean that you will be 3-tapping a bit more often than the XM4, especially if you're hitting them from behind where the arms aren't in the way.
Did you pray today?
The Lachmann also has a better 4-tap consistency than the XM4. Its guaranteed 4-tap range extends all the way up to 25 meters, which is much longer than the XM4's 18 meters. This is because the Lachmann can 4-tap in the second damage phase even with all leg shots, while the XM4 requires 2 shots above the legs. This is by no means inconsistent, but it does mean that you will occasionally 5-tap. It is also quite interesting to think about how we progressed with the meta 4-tap flex ARs over the years when it comes to hitboxes. We started off with chest and upper arms with the ground 5.56, and then we went on to chest and full arms with the Type 19, stomach and up with the XM4, and now we have full body 4-tap with the Lachmann. But how about the maximum 4-tap range? Well, this is another feature of the Lachmann, having the potential to 4-tap all the way up to 35 meters compared to the XM4's 28.5. This covers pretty much every practical sightline you can find in standard multiplayer, and it will be quite rare for you to need more than 4 shots to kill. Achieving this potential requires you to effectively avoid leg shots, which is not guaranteed, but it is more than reasonable considering the reward you get. Since we are on the topic of range, the Lachmann also features good accuracy to make use of its impressive 4-tap range. Its BSA is slightly worse than the XM4's, but it is still sufficient for most of the ranges you can find in standard multiplayer. When it comes to the recoil, this is where things get interesting. The XM4 is known for having extremely consistent recoil, being straight vertical until the last 10 shots, which will lean to the right. The Lachmann's is very similar, going up with a slight lean to the left for the first 40 shots, before switching to the right for the remaining 20. The main difference here is that the Lachmann's overall magnitude is way lower than the XM4's. We are pretty much bordering on LK24 territory here. This means that the Lachmann has some of the least recoil in the game, and you will hardly have to pull down. So this combined with its phenomenal 4-tap range means that you can be dangerously effective at mid to longer ranges. The XM4 does have extremely fast bullet speed at a little over 1200 meters per second compared to the Lachmann's 960, but you guys have been cross-mapping with Odin's Type 63s and USS 9s anyway, all of which have even slower bullet speed, so this is not exactly a factor that affects its viability in any meaningful way. Some of you might have caught on to me mentioning how much ammo it has, and that is because the Lachmann has a relatively high ammo capacity at 60 rounds. For a 4-tap assault rifle, this results in some impressive kills per mag, allowing you to stay in the fight for a bit longer than the XM4. But as a trade-off, your reload time is pretty slow, taking 1.87 seconds for its tactical reload time and just over 2 seconds when reloading from empty. So in the event that you do have to reload, your downtime will be quite noticeable, although given that this is offset by the larger mag size, you'll find that it is still fairly manageable. Mobility is quite solid for an assault rifle intended for mid to longer ranges. Its sprint speed is faster than average for assault rifles at 6.38 meters per second, while its ADS movement speed is average at 2.9 meters per second. This is overall better than the XM4, which either has to deal with slow sprint or ADS movement speed depending on your attachments. ADS time is very slightly faster than average at 265 milliseconds, so the handling should be more than familiar for most players. It is also worth mentioning that the Lachmann's hipfire accuracy is a lot better than the XM4's. The XM4 is a weapon with very few drawbacks, but one of them includes the suboptimal hipfire spread. In fact, it is one of the worst in its class, especially if you're using any of the stocks, which penalize it even further. This means that unless you jam the gun so far up the enemy's ass that you can see the barrel coming out of their mouth, you're forced to always ADS and should never ever hipfire. This makes the XM4 a lot less effective in skirmish encounters, where being able to shave off those extra milliseconds from aiming in can be a real lifesaver. The Lachmann, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem as it features standard hipfire spread, so you can get away with not ADSing up close. On a less statistical note, the Lachmann also has way better iron sights than the XM4. The base sights of the XM4 are quite obstructive. The large ring-shaped rear sight takes up a good chunk of space, and you can potentially lose your target in them. For those who don't have any of the good blueprints, they might have to waste an attachment slot for an optic. The Lachmann doesn't need to make such a sacrifice as the base sights are much cleaner. The rear sight is way less obstructive and doesn't take quite as much screen space, making the Lachmann more free-to-play friendly. So after all of that leads us to the question: did they kill the XM4? Oh wait, I already have a video for that. Let me rephrase. Has the Lachmann 5.56 truly replaced the XM4? I'm just going to get this out of the way. The Lachmann is not a direct upgrade to the XM4. Both weapons are different enough with their own unique advantages, which we'll get into in a moment. The best way to describe the Lachmann would be, what would happen if we took the Grau and Peacekeeper and deleted all of their weaknesses? It doesn't suffer from mediocre 4-tap range like the Grau, nor the suboptimal recoil and small mag size of the Peacekeeper, and despite having about the same time to kill, the Lachmann can partially mitigate this due to its 3-tap potential with either chests or headshots. This allows it to fare way better against the current meta. But how does it stack up against the XM4?
This is where the fun begins.
Before we can properly answer that, we have to consider what role these weapons serve. What purpose do they fulfill? In the current meta, both the Lachmann and XM4 aren't suited for playing aggressively. They don't kill fast enough on a consistent basis, nor do they ADS quick enough, so they will get easily outgunned in closer ranges by the other meta weapons. This means that these are primarily mid-range weapons, not staying all the way back like a true passive assault rifle, but keeping just enough distance to outrange some of the faster killing weapons. And now that we've identified the roles of both weapons, deciding which weapon is better will be much easier, since all we have to do is find out which weapon's advantages are more relevant to that role. The XM4 features a slightly faster time to kill, next to no hit flinch, faster bullet speed, and a faster reload speed. The Lachmann, on the other hand, features a much longer guaranteed and potential 4-tap range, slightly better odds at 3-tapping up close, some of the least recoil in the game, actually workable hipfire spread, and a larger mag. I've already explained why the bullet speed difference doesn't impact the weapon all that much, and the XM4's faster reload time is offset by the Lachmann's larger mag. So that leaves the XM4 with the time to kill and hit flinch advantage. I will hand it to the XM4 for having absurdly low hit flinch. This is quite valuable in a meta dominated by weapons with boosted bullet impact. However, what most people tend to focus on is the time to kill difference. They see that the XM4 kills 9 milliseconds faster and immediately say it's better. But here's the thing. 9 milliseconds isn't that big. It is definitely not nothing, don't get me wrong, but it is not enough to completely dismiss what the Lachmann brings to the table. A quick question for the class. What does a weapon that focuses on mid to longer ranges need more than anything? If you picked either damage range or low recoil, you're correct. Some players will be taken aback by the fact that it kills slightly slower, but this is one of those few cases where the stats don't showcase the full picture of the weapon's effectiveness. Because when you actually use it in game, the time to kill doesn't feel that slow. Turns out being able to accurately land shots is incredibly useful, because sure, the time to kill is not as fast, but do you know what's even slower? The time to kill when you miss because of the recoil. Thanks to how easy it is to beam with this gun, you'll be working with a much more realistic time to kill, and with how far that 4-tap range extends to, very few weapons can reliably challenge you at range. So overall, the Lachmann is easily an upper tier assault rifle that specializes at mid-range. This is not to say that the XM4 is made completely irrelevant. It is still a very competitive weapon to use in the current meta, just that the Lachmann has more upsides that are relevant to the function that both weapons serve. I will also like to point out that the nerf to the XM4 from last season is actually a genius move on the devs' part, now that the Lachmann is part of the picture. If you watched my XM4 video, you'd know that you can't use the Serpent Wrap without dealing with poor hit flinch, so you can no longer build it to have a super fast ADS time. This could have been a legitimate advantage over the Lachmann, as it will allow the XM4 to play much more aggressively. But obviously the devs wanted the new gun to replace it, so they had to remove what could have been the biggest upside of the weapon. Building the Lachmann 5.56 is quite simple. Start with the Lach 12 barrel. This is the mandatory attachment as it improves the weapon's damage multipliers, extending its effective 4-tap range while improving mobility and handling. Harbinger D20 for concealment, range and bullet speed, S-Grip 0 for the improved BSA and reduced hit flinch, Lachmann Factory S9 stock to improve mobility and handling, and the 60 round reload for the largest mag size. Alternatively, you can swap the suppressor for the Polar Fire S. Your 4-tap range will extend to 40 meters, but you do lose some bullet speed. Personally, I don't think this is necessary since 35 meters is plenty, but it is an option. You can also use the Lachmann S76 factory stock instead. This has less downside compared to the S9 stock, but your ADS time will be a bit slower. For a more passive build, you can replace the stock with the SZ1mW PEQ laser. With this build, you get phenomenal BSA and less recoil at the cost of slower mobility and handling. And that covers everything there is to know about the Lachmann 5.56. As for my thoughts on the weapon, I'm glad that the devs have hopefully learned their lesson with the SO14. Not every weapon needs to be obscenely busted to be meta, and the Lachmann is a perfect example of that. This is easily replacing the XM4 as one of my new favorite weapons. But that's just my experience for using a weapon, so how do you feel about the Lachmann 5.56? Do you think you'll be picking it over the XM4 after watching this video? Feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you found the video helpful, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. But until then, I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.